So, in this explainer, we're not just going to talk about spinning up a Kubernetes cluster. No, we're talking about building a digital fortress from the ground up. We're going to break down the absolute must-do steps for locking down a self-managed environment right from the very beginning. Okay, let's just dive right in. Your cluster's up, your apps are running, all the dashboards are green, everything seems fine, right? It's functional. But here's the thing, and it's a hard truth. Does functional actually mean secure? So often the answer is a big fat no. Most clusters are built to work first, and we push security to some hardening phase down the road that, let's be honest, rarely ever happens. And this slide right here, it perfectly captures that dangerous gap. On one side, you've got functional. It passes health checks, it runs your code. Great. But on the other, you see the reality. An API server exposed to the whole internet. Or all that critical etcd traffic just flying around in the clear, unencrypted. The system works, but it's basically a house with the front door wide open. And this gets us to the absolute core idea of this whole explainer. Security is not an app you install later. It's not a feature you just add on. It has to be baked in from the very first command you run, because the most critical security decisions you'll ever make happen right at cluster creation.
And this quote, man, it's pretty stark, right? But for a really good reason. Just think about it for a second. Trying to change these core security settings after the fact is like trying to replace the foundation of a house while you're still living in it. It's not just hard, it's incredibly risky. And a lot of the time, the only truly safe way to fix it is to tear it all down and start over.
So, why is it such a one-way street? Well, it breaks down like this. We're not talking about little tweaks in a config file. We're talking about the fundamental startup flags that tell the core pieces of your cluster how to boot up and, more importantly, how to trust each other. Once that initial handshake is done and that trust is set, you can't just go back and change the rules of the game without breaking the entire system. All right, so now that we've hammered that home, let's get to the good stuff, securing the control plane. This is the brain of your entire Kubernetes operation, and you better believe it's the #1 target for any attacker. First up is the API server. I want you to think of this as the single, heavily fortified gatehouse to your entire kingdom. Seriously, every single request, whether it's from you, a developer, or another machine, has to pass through this one checkpoint. It is the ultimate bouncer and policy enforcer for the whole cluster. So how do we secure this gatehouse? Well, here are 3 things that are absolutely non-negotiable. First, disable anonymous authentication. I mean, you wouldn't leave your front door unlocked, right? It's the same idea. Second, you have to enforce strong authentication, like using client certificates. And third, turn on role-based access control, or RBAC, to make sure that even people who are allowed in can only do exactly what they're supposed to do, and nothing more.
Okay, if the API server is the gatehouse, then etcd, well, that's the vault holding the crown jewels. It's the database that stores everything. The complete state of your cluster, every configuration, every token, and yep, every single secret. If an attacker gets access to etcd, it is literally game over. They own the entire kingdom. So protecting these jewels is, everything. And here's how we do it. First, encrypt all the traffic flowing between clients, like the API server and etcd. Second, encrypt the traffic between the etcd nodes themselves as they replicate data. And third, and this is a huge one, you have to enable encryption at rest. This means even if someone physically steals the hard drive, your secrets are still safe.
All right, so we've locked down the control plane. Awesome. Now, let's zoom out a bit and look at the worker nodes and the pods running on them. This is where your actual applications live, and it's often where an attacker will try to get their first foothold.
So in every single one of your worker nodes, there's this critical little agent running called the kubelet. Think of it as the local foreman. It takes orders from the control plane and manages the pods on its specific node. But if it's misconfigured, that foreman can become a massive weak link, allowing an attacker who breaks into just one node to potentially take over the entire cluster. So we have got to lock this agent down. The steps here are absolutely critical. Disable anonymous access so no one can just talk to it. Require strong certificate-based authentication so it can prove its identity. And most importantly, make sure authorization decisions are delegated back to the main API server. This stops a compromised node from going rogue and doing things it shouldn't.
Now let's talk about the workloads themselves, your pods.
Kubernetes has these fantastic built-in guardrails called pod security standards, and they come in 3 flavors. Privileged is basically God mode. You should only ever use it for super trusted system stuff. Baseline is the sensible default, the sweet spot for most of your apps. And restricted is for your most sensitive workloads, clamping down with really strong security settings.
Okay, so we've hardened the components and we've hardened the workloads. But security is also about isolation. How do we control who can talk to what? Well, it all boils down to 2 main things: identity and networking.
All right, here's a little gotcha that trips up so many people. By default, Kubernetes is super helpful and gives every single pod a service account token. This token lets it talk to the API server. The problem? 99% of your pods have absolutely no reason to do this, and it creates a huge, unnecessary attack surface just sitting there. So the fix is all about the principle of least privilege, right? You gotta lock it down. First, disable that automatic token mounting by default. Then, for the few apps that actually need to talk to the API, you create a special service account with a really narrow RBAC role. And please, just avoid granting cluster admin permissions to your workloads. It's a recipe for disaster. Okay, let's switch gears to networking. And this next part, it's a real shocker for a lot of people when they first hear it. In a brand new, out-of-the-box Kubernetes cluster, the network is completely flat. That means any pod can talk to any other pod anywhere across any namespace. There is 0 network isolation by default. And this visual just nails it. This is where network policies come in and save the day. On the left, you've got this total free-for-all, where one compromised pod can scan your entire network. But on the right, bam! A simple default deny policy blocks all traffic unless you specifically allow it. This one change instantly shrinks the blast radius if a breach ever happens.
But look, building a secure cluster, that's just step 1. Security isn't a set-it-and-forget-it deal. It's a continuous process. You have to keep monitoring and validating to make sure your cluster stays secure.
And this is exactly why audit logs are an absolute must-have. Think of them as the security camera system for your cluster's API server. They give you a permanent record of every single action: who accessed a secret, who created a new admin role, everything. Without these logs, trying to figure out what happened during an incident is just pure guesswork.
But here's the tricky part. A perfectly secure setup today can totally drift into being insecure tomorrow, maybe because of a quick fix during an outage or some ad hoc change. So that leads to a really important question. How do you stop that security drift and make sure you maintain that secure baseline over time?
And that really brings us to the final, most important takeaway here. A secure Kubernetes cluster does not happen by accident. It's not magic. It is the direct result of deliberate, conscious choices that you make from the very beginning. It's a checklist, and you have to follow it with discipline. So the real question isn't, do I have time to build security in from the start? It's, can I really truly afford not to?